for joining us. We're getting started with our 9th CannaCareers module, as I've mentioned before. A little bit about WOKE first. Women of Color in Cannabis, WOKE, WOCC pronounced woke, is a federally recognized 501c3 nonprofit organization. We were founded in 2018, and our mission is clear: to create safe spaces for women, minorities, and other marginalized communities, and clear pathways to enter the legal cannabis industry. In 2020, towards that end, we launched our CannaCareers, which is an employment program that provides free resources to those who are seeking employment in the cannabis industry, along with our partners, THC Staffing, a cannabis staffing agency, Quality Control Analytics, a compliance training company, and Joint Venturing Company, a marketing and brand activation company. Every second Saturday of the month, we host a free informational session, like the one we're hosting today, to tackle a new topic about getting gainful employment in the cannabis industry. Other parts of our CannaCareers program that I want to share with you guys include free one-on-one resume reviews and a vetted job board with open opportunities nationwide. So when you get a chance, visit our CannaCareers page on our website at wocc.world/CannaCareers to learn more. Today's session is called Overview on Ancillary Opportunities in Cannabis, Human Resources. We are joined by 2 HR professionals who will be sharing their expertise on all things hiring and job preparedness in cannabis. Danielle Schumacher of THC Staffing, that I've mentioned before, is one of our CannaCareers partners, as well as, as well as Nikita Kayabyab from MCR Labs. We are also joined by our other CannaCareers partner, Ashley Boucher of Quality Control Analytics, who will be co-facilitating the session. With that, I'll hand it over to our speakers to continue and further introduce themselves. Feel free to start, ladies. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sammy, for that wonderful introduction. As Sammy mentioned, my name's Ashley Boucher, and I will be helping to facilitate the discussion today. During this presentation, we're going to identify some of the possible career opportunities, learn about the description and duties for HR roles, and understand how to find, apply, and interview for HR roles. But before we get into some of those topics, I would really like to hear from our speakers. Starting with Nikita, we would love to hear about your journey, how you got into the industry, your current role in the industry. If you can start talking about how you ended up as HR manager for MCR Labs.
Absolutely. And my journey started a little over 3.5 years ago at MCR. And during that time, there wasn't as many avenues as there is now to get a job in a cannabis company. You don't see as many, now we're seeing all the postings everywhere, the different events you can go to. I got into the industry, into this company through the connections I built. I was getting burnt out in my previous career, which was education. And I did have some office administration background as well. And I really just wanted to get back into that because I was done teaching at that time in my life. So I was introduced to our founder and president, Michael Kahn, and I really expressed my interest in working at his company and the value I can bring to his company. So I sent him my resume. I applied for a position they actually did not have at the time. It was their office manager position that I got an offer for. And they were small, and just like every startup, there's a lot of positions that they didn't know that, they would need. He agreed to give me an interview. I ended up interviewing with pretty much all of the founders there. I had 7 interviews before I got the job. I interviewed with Michael Kahn, our president, like I stated. I interviewed with our CFO, interviewed with our VP of Scientific Operations, Scott Churchill. I also interviewed with Jonathan Wani, who is our VP of Business Development. So pretty much everyone, all of our founders there, I interviewed with, really trying to prove to them that I was there to help them out and that they needed, my assistance with doing the office administration stuff that they were doing. After those interviews, a few weeks later, I landed the job, and I was so excited to go through and help them out with stuff, their office administration is like handling their intakes. I was helping them with doing procurement. I was wearing many hats when I started, just like any other startup. And it got to a point where I was not able to handle all of those tasks. We had to start expanding our departments. And we hired, and I was focusing more on the HR side of the functions I was doing. And my time at MCR kind of evolution ended up into this HR manager position I have now today. And I could not be any more grateful than all the learning I've done through my, almost 4 years now at MCR. As their HR manager, I handle their payroll. I handle compensation and benefits, employee relations, full cycle recruiting. So from posting a position to hiring the individuals, and then also the training that goes into it afterwards as well. Ensuring the organization is compliant with all local, state, and federal laws. And of course, the governing bodies that every state has when it comes to cannabis. I also make sure that we are following their regulations when it comes to the hiring practices, as well as just understanding, the federal laws with the pandemic that we've gone through. It has been a very challenging few years now for HR professionals and having to learn how to navigate those laws and regulations that we're to make sure our employees and our companies are safe. So it's been a journey, and it's a wonderful journey that I've been through here.
Thank you for sharing. And before I move on to Danielle, I noticed that you used a little keyword that I wanted to explore a little more, startup. You described MCR Labs as a startup when you first got into your position. Do you still consider MCR Labs a startup? And if you can just talk about the difference of working for a startup and an already established company.
I do think we still have our startup moments. And that's because we're also expanding. We're looking to venture into other states. And we're also going through that transition of being a startup to, a medium-sized business. So there's challenges there where we're going through and figuring out how do we transition into that. Management styles, everything with going from a startup to an established business is going to be roadblocks, there's going to be challenges, there's going to be things to overcome during that time. And when you're adding also scaling the company into other states, you're always going to feel like you're in a startup mode where you have to roll up your sleeves and you have to wear multiple hats to make sure that you get to that goal that you want. Because we're going into those other states, our other locations are startups. So I think until, and I honestly feel like we're always going to feel that way as long as we keep on growing. Yeah, some of our locations are going to be more established, but we're always going to have that startup because we want to grow, and MCR is doing a great job of doing that.
Hey, that's awesome. Yeah. Sometimes I feel, reaching that point of established is sort of an idea, right? Because we're always growing, transitioning, really wherever you are in the industry. But thank you for sharing that. And talking about startups, Danielle, I would love to hear how you started in this industry and starting your own HR company, your staffing, THC staffing group.
Yeah, for sure. I'll start with present that, THC staffing, we just had our 7th anniversary as a official company. And I still feel like it's a startup in many ways. Even though when we started THC staffing in 2014, I'd already been in the industry for over 10 years, but for the first 5 or 10 years I was in it, it wasn't really referred to as an industry yet. I mean, there was some parts of the country that were definitely an industry. But a lot of my work experience is pre-industry, more of grassroots organizing. And also what we'll get into a lot today is like office administration work. There's a lot of overlap with HR. So and I wanted to mention, I'm just so proud to be working with MCR for this session today. And thank you, Nikita, for sharing more with us about career paths and your work that I know we're going to get into later. And Woke, thank you for working with me as I mentioned, I've been in cannabis for many years. It's really going on 20 years right now, and been working with Woke for about a year and a half through THC staffing. Woke is a nonprofit, as we've mentioned, and the pandemic really led me to pay more attention to virtual events. And as a recruiter, one of the things that came to mind was, ooh, how are people going to be getting into the industry and networking and building the community that we really need? The first event that got my attention was a Me Too and marijuana session. And that was the first time in all the years I've been paying attention as the movement and the industry has grown. I've never seen even a conference session talking about Me Too in marijuana specifically. So it means a lot to me, also as a survivor, that Woke, and now that I'm part of it now, that we're doing what we can to create safe spaces. And that's a lot of what our work is about through THC staffing, is creating more safe space in companies and in organizations in cannabis and all the forms that takes. So I did want to share a few things about myself. Currently based in the Chicago area. I'm from Illinois. And as I mentioned, I became interested in cannabis, more broadly drug policy reform, when I was in college in the early 2000s. And I became an abolitionist, a prison abolitionist, and I knew that I wanted for that to be the focus of the rest of my life in some form. I didn't expect it to be paid work or a career path. So that's how I kind of came in a roundabout way to a career path in the cannabis industry. And definitely not saying that the cannabis industry is in line with prison abolition. We have a lot of work. There's not a lot of overlap, unfortunately, of actually trying to get everybody out who's in prison. But that is a big part of what I do. There's a whole pipeline and workforce development programs starting to happen in cannabis. And this is all related. So my first paid work in cannabis was with the nonprofit Illinois Normal. That was in 2003. Which led to me living in California. I worked in the cannabis field there from 2005 to 2019. So a lot of my experiences with the California medical cannabis businesses. So let's see. And THC staffing, we were formed because of this kind of disconnect of like, it's coming from a social justice movement, but as we all know, is like mostly about the big business now. So I think all of us here today are somewhere in there trying to navigate all of this. And what I want to share about specifically my career path, a lot of my work really has been administrative. So personal assistant, office manager, event producer, project manager. That can be with nonprofits. I'm working on campaigns, programs like Woke, CannaCareers, all kinds of networking events and educational events. Also, I know we're talking mostly about Ancillary today, but I have worked in with dispensaries and as an ancillary business, as a staffing company. We work in a ancillary way with dispensaries, cultivation. I want to emphasize a really good work experience, either outside of cannabis or is working in doctors' offices and law offices, working with lawyers, medical professionals, any field that overlaps so much with cannabis and is very methodical and regulated. So that's actually the bulk of my work experience was managing a cannabis doctor's office and working with a lot of lawyers and legal cases because, and we still have that, right? We still have a lot of cannabis business owners who have federal cases that they're navigating or state level compliance issues that borderline legal work. So there's a lot of overlap there. And just kind of wanted to end for now saying, that, I think it's not ideal for a white, cisgender white woman like myself to be sharing advice specifically for women of color. But I think that particularly in HR, there's there's an intersection there where we do have to be really collaborative, and we are one of the kind of common denominators through HR work and training for actually building the diverse teams and the culture and the inclusive environments that we all want to see. So I'm really happy to be part of this and be able to share what advice I can that does feel relevant sometimes, since I've been doing it so long, and because I am coming to it with so much white privilege, I often don't know what I can share that would be most helpful. So I appreciate having a chance to go into a little bit more detail about myself today, where THC staffing came from, and then later on walking through some of the job application and interview process.
Thank you, Danielle. And just know I appreciate your advice 100%. I see your heart where you're coming from, and I appreciate you and your advice. And so you're always, for me, you're always welcome in our circle. I did notice when you were talking about, physicians' offices, working in doctors' offices. And to give everyone a little background about myself and how I ended up in the role that I am currently in the cannabis industry. I can go back and start with, I actually came from the medical field. There is a lot of synergy with the medical field and the cannabis industry. I started off as a medical lab scientist, and I first built my company, Quality Control Analytics, to actually provide consultant work for medical labs. I quickly became very disheartened because, well, I found a lot of corruption and non-compliance within those labs. And, I took a step back, and I then entered into the cannabis industry, starting as a manufacturing manager for a manufacturing facility here in Massachusetts. One of the things I found most frustrating was the lack of education and the lack of, resources to find the questions to my answers, because I had a lot of questions. The answers to my questions, I had a lot of questions. I came in, I was like, well, what's this? Why are we doing it this way? Why are we using this? Well, what happens here? Why are you growing it this way? What do you, and everyone's like, well, kind of looking at me like a deer in headlights, because I can ask a lot of questions sometimes. At the same time, actually, the opportunity to become a responsible vendor trainer here in Massachusetts was available. So I was like, well, I want to learn. I see where some of these knowledge gaps are. Maybe I should, just take that deep dive and get into training in the cannabis industry. Responsible vendor training, which I am a responsible vendor trainer accredited by the Cannabis Control Commission here in Massachusetts. What that entails is just really talking about the laws and regulations that govern cannabis here in Massachusetts, and also talking about the plant and the science of the plant, how it interacts with the body, preventing sales and diversion to minors. And I'm very fortunate that I get to go out to many different facilities and educate the workforce. Other current duties I have as a trainer are providing other types of education for the workforce. I've done KPI training. I'm creating policy training currently for establishments. And I've also had the opportunity to work with those who were negatively impacted by the war on drugs in a program where they brought, it was from prison to the workforce. And I got to work with individuals who were transitioning out of prison and going into the workforce. And they primarily had a record based on cannabis related charges. And so I was very fortunate to be part of that program. And I have some other workforce development trainings in the works. And I feel very fortunate to be positioned where I am now. If you asked me, several years ago, if I ever thought I would end up in this role, I'd probably say no. But if you're on the fence of thinking, do you want to join the cannabis industry? If you do have a passion for the plant, if you have a passion for helping others, if you have a passion for building, this is the industry, right? Being innovative and creative. And I would encourage you to really to take that step. And to join the industry, even if you're not sure where you want to go. We hope that this educational seminar will help you, and think if you're thinking about a role in human resources in cannabis. Hopefully during this presentation will help you enter into the industry. Now, enough about me. I want to hear about some of the job opportunities that might be for human resources. Nikita or Danielle, do you want to share about some of the job opportunities that you currently see available in the industry? It can be either ancillary or in a plant touching establishment, or in a tech company too. We see a lot of HR tech companies here in this industry.
So yeah, there's countless job opportunities, whether it's an ancillary job opportunity working at different type of vendors that our companies are using. I know for ourselves at MCR Labs, we're using different vendors to streamline our processes in the HR department. So when we're looking at those cannot talk right now at those vendors. I'm talking to different companies that have the HRIS systems that we're looking for recruiting systems that we're looking for. And these companies, sometimes it's hard to find ones that want to work with the cannabis space. So the companies that do, there's a lot of opportunity there for them to get those salespeople there to work with us and people to actually train our team here to use their product, which is, so there's that opportunity. And then within the companies themselves, whether it's a plant touching, company or is a testing company like the ones I work for, the departments are getting larger. So for my department, I have a recruiter on staff because we are growing. I cannot do all the recruiting myself anymore. We have a recruiter on site. We also have someone who is dedicated to just payroll and benefits. And then I have another individual who is, dedicated to the onboarding process and the orientations and everything like that. And then myself who oversees all of it. So there's a lot of different opportunities out there, whether it's within a cannabis company itself or the vendors that we utilize to make our processes and procedures streamlined.
Yeah, and I can echo, it's good to hear that there's more companies having in-house HR teams. It's another reason I'm so happy that you could tell us more about the team you lead at MCR, because I wish more cannabis companies took it that seriously, because I do see a lot of contractor work opportunities, as far as, and which maybe some people prefer to be a contractor and not be in-house, but for sure in-house HR teams that are so intertwined with so many different kinds of training, and that's often shifting. So I know there's intersection with different kinds of third-party trainings that are required in some states. And even just keeping up with all of that. And as you said, payroll and benefits, if you have experience specifically with that and you feel confident with administering payroll, benefits, interviews and reviews, and there's so many different aspects of HR. And often in preparing for today, I was looking around out of curiosity for specific job opportunities that are posted online right now in cannabis that have HR in the title, and there were very few, way fewer than I expected. So it really ebbs and flows as far as how many jobs are available at any point in time during the year. A lot of cannabis companies are, and like in many industries, very focused on the quarters. So right now, Q4, it may or may not be a really busy time for hiring. And also with HR, I think about upward mobility within companies. It's very unpredictable and can be limited, meaning that like a lot of HR jobs might not be posted publicly. For instance, the work I do as a recruiter, we have some jobs posted on our job board publicly, and some that are not public, or when companies are doing it in-house, of course, they might not be overtly advertising, but people are working up. So that kind of goes back to the theme today of, other kinds of work that are transferable, and essentially comes down to how much experience do you have with hiring and firing, just managing people. It might not be in a formal HR role. And by the way, as far as job opportunities, if you have some sort of HR certification or directly relevant degrees, like, of course, you should be looking for things that are in line with that, but that's not always required. There's a lot of career paths here that don't require those certifications, or the certifications are preferred because the work experience itself is really important. And I don't want to get too far ahead into the transferable skills conversation, but just a few quick notes about jobs I did find that are listed right now. There's different categories that companies use. So one you'll want to look for is actually going to companies' websites, like the tech seed to sale companies, and looking at their career page under people operations. Sometimes it'll just be some sort of office manager role. I know we're going to be posting one within the next few days through THC Staffing. And Ashley, I know that your work, you're a independent, you're self-employed, but also have a lot of experience with the range of job opportunities related to training. And I was curious to hear more.
Yeah, so training can occur right from the HR department within an establishment, or it might occur with a third-party vendor like myself. When I work with HR professionals within establishments, I always tell them internal training is the gold standard. And so I see that there are establishments that are hiring. They're hiring training ambassadors. They're hiring individuals to have in-house to not only do HR specific training on like policy training, or they're also looking for training, OSHA training, other compliance training, job specific training, which sometimes doesn't always occur from, an HR level employee, but might occur on the job training. So there are training opportunities. I tend to find, and please share your thoughts with this, but especially right where we are, still a lot of us in the industry are still considered startups. And so when you are a startup, sometimes the HR roles or the training roles are the last thought of, or they're not always thought of first. And I think that within probably the next 3 years, we're going to see those job opportunities really increase for HR and for training, especially as we see from like the state and potentially even federal level that training requirements such as OSHA training, ensuring that there is training for anti-harassment, ensuring that violence in the workplace training is being met. We're going to see that the training opportunities to work in the industry will expand. We don't see too many right now for training, staff in the establishments. A lot of the ancillary opportunities for providing training to the industry will come from people like me who are self-employed or own their own businesses. So that's always an avenue. I didn't look at the particular, the number of jobs that might be available, but they're probably pretty slim right now, as it stands right now. I don't want that to discourage anyone. Just keep your eyes open, keep your ears open, look for opportunities that might arise. And for training, a lot of those roles are probably going to be more entry level in the industry currently as it is. Remember, the industry is rapidly growing, and I know that we were met with a lot of challenges with the pandemic, but I think that the cannabis industry did pretty well. I think we weathered ourselves pretty well during that pandemic, and so we are still seeing industry growth. Talking about entry-level positions, are there different positions that you see primarily for HR? And do those positions incorporate training in some of those HR positions that we might see?
Yeah, so for those kind of positions, I feel like a lot of I agree with you, Ashley and Danielle, when it's like, when we're looking for HR positions, especially with these startups, you're not going to tend to find, an HR manager position right off the bat for these companies. They're focusing on their production. They're focusing on their product. For us, it is the testing. That's our product. For dispensaries, it is, the plant is their product, and they're focusing on getting those on the shelves, or for us, testing. So the back-end administration tends to be like the last thing that they're thinking of when scaling the company up. We're important, but it's always like they need to get that stuff done first. So for getting into it, looking for those office administrative jobs, because those are the first things that they're thinking, those entry-level positions, like the position I started off in as their office manager. That's how I got my foot in the door and showed that there were these HR functions. They needed a dedicated person to actually oversee. So I would encourage anyone who's looking at these companies, look at those, administrative jobs that they're posting, because there may be opportunities to grow within that position, and showing them that they're going to need more hands on deck when it comes to that back end as they grow.
And I can add to that about entry level. When we do see them, I see a lot of entry level recruiter types of positions that are very tech heavy, very operational, like coordinating candidates and interviews, things like that. Especially during the pandemic, I was looking around for myself. I was like, I don't know what's going to happen. I've got THC staffing that I do, but what would I do if I were applying for a job? I saw a lot of entry-level recruiter, entry-level payroll and benefits kinds of things, where I wish that wasn't entry level, but as long as it's paying decent and it's an opportunity for somebody to get experience and be able to move up, that does make sense. So you never know what you might see as what we call entry level, but could be actually like a pretty quick springboard, to Nikita's point. If you're around and doing the work, and it also gives you a chance to see, do you want to grow with this company? Do you want to be part of that, being HR, which is like hand in hand with the company culture? Is it a company culture that you want to be part of? So there might be entry or mid-level jobs that aren't exactly what you think you want to do, but will give you a chance to see what you want to do and learn, and get familiar with some of the seed to sale and different aspects of the plant touching. As Nikita mentioned, the overwhelming focus is always on the product and everything except HR, and it depends on the time and the company. Do they have full-time people dedicated to those things? It happens over time, and then also keep in mind, I don't ever see job opportunities posted like this, but I think it's an element, especially of some of the entry level, as large cannabis companies are merging and being acquired. You've probably all started to hear about waves of layoffs in every industry, but in cannabis, layoffs is an HR thing. And then like taking over a company and coming into a state and like replacing a bunch of people, that's an HR function. So just to be aware that sometimes it's not exactly what you want to be involved in, but it is part of the business.
One of my favorite things when I have a new establishment that I'm working with is when they introduce me to their new HR and culture manager. I'm like, yay! So you do see it, right? That and it's actually it's really a joyous moment when you see a company that's starting out, and then they start to scale up, and I think one of the first roles that they start to hire is for HR. Once they're at that position where, okay, we have a viable product, we have our foothold in the market. Now we're looking for HR and culture managers. And I'm seeing that those two titles are starting to go together. And I think that's great. And, but when we are seeing, our roles available, I've highlighted here just some of the qualifications, and we all sort of put our minds together to think of the four top qualifications that we might see for HR roles. Experience with recruiting, interviewing, onboarding, and supervising staff. So you have to work well with people. Experience with developing and implementing training. That might be part of the role. That might be tech-based, like managing a learner management system or an LMS system, or providing training in front of a group of individuals. So you may have to be able to get up and give a presentation. The ability to process and protect sensitive information. Most of the information you're handling in HR will probably be confidential in some nature. And the ability to work respectively with a diverse team. Do you want to expand on some of these qualifications to help? And if you can think of any transferable skills in other industries that might help someone meet one of these qualifications when looking for a job in HR.
Yeah, I'd like to just add to the qualifications. I think one thing sometimes that get missed on job descriptions is also noting the soft skills needed to be in human resources. There's a lot of, things that come to being the human resource, professional within a company, and is communicating with your employees, with your managers, being able to do conflict resolutions. And if the soft skills aren't there, it's definitely difficult to handle on a day-to-day basis. And then also just being able to handle the different challenges that come with human resources. It's not an easy job. I think a lot of people think you're at your computer and you're just dealing with paperwork. It's not just that. It is dealing with the people, it is dealing with legal, it's dealing with a lot of things that people might not see because everything is always behind closed doors because of that sensitive information. So definitely the soft skills and being able to transition in difficult times. Seeing all the different, like I stated earlier, the pandemic definitely kind of threw a wrench into HR, professionals' lives and having to learn how to navigate through that. And I think now everyone who's in HR can come up on the other end and said that they accomplished, something they never thought they would have to accomplish.
Yeah, that's very, very present. I think the pandemic obviously created a huge shift in all of our work. And will continue to be a huge factor for HR specifically because people have a renewed sense or maybe their first awakening of like, work is not my most important part of my life. And so to manage that as the HR team of like how to help employees stick around, like have the support they need to stay and grow with the company. And also all the employment law, all of the cannabis law, all of the regulatory framework that you're working within. It's a lot. So I agree. It's very challenging work. It can be very rewarding. And I think of it as, a lot of my work experience as a teenager and college student was as a server in restaurants. And it feels similar in the sense of like kind of sink or swim, like you're either cut out for it or not really, and you have to kind of figure that out. Like, is this something I really can do? And do I want to do it? Just because you can doesn't mean it's what you want to stay with for a while. So this career path kind of takes some turns. It's not always linear. It can be, and talking about qualifications, I mean, it can be based on, for sure, in the beginning, for the first 10 years of your career, like, what are your skills? What are the qualifications? Almost any work experience. And you've been interviewed as a candidate, right? Like as an employee. So I also think that experience is valuable. Let's see, I emphasized the sensitive information because, as Ashley said, pretty much everything that you handle as an HR person is something that's most likely confidential. And just have to be super organized and respectful and self-aware. So also to the comment from the audience, like emotional intelligence and those soft skills.
So the theme I keep hearing come up is the pandemic. that the pandemic definitely had in a large impact, for HR teams. For me as a trainer, the pandemic was actually, it worked out in my benefit because I could transition most of my training online. At that point, we got to transition to actually having it on demand as well. Before, it had to be in person via online, or at the establishment physically in person. And so I actually lucked out with the pandemic, because then I could just provide it on demand through the training on demand through the LMS system. So that worked out for me. But if you want to add more about any specific challenges that you experienced during the pandemic in the HR role, I would love to hear that, because we've all had different experiences and different perspectives.
So some of the challenges we had was having to just do a complete pivot to remote life, and also for the safety of our employees, and also being able to think about the safety of our employees and still run a company. We were, with being a startup, we had a small facility. We still do. We're kind of busting at the seams, being like we're growing and we have a great space, but we need a new facility. And so to allow our employees to still get, the work that they're done, that they need to get done, but also keep them safe, kind of pivoted our shifts the way it ran. And also how we're going to compensate our employees, because now they're working less than, what they typically work, because we're doing it out of the safety of, their well-being and mentally, health, wise, just everything just pivoting that way. So when it also came to hiring, recruiting, doing the interviews, we didn't want to have people to actually come on site and do interviews. Everything was remote now. So the onboarding also was remote, just getting everything, doing everything we used to do in a different way now. And it was always through virtual, and having to mail out equipment now, where people would just have to come in and grab their laptop. Now we had to mail everything out. So it definitely pivoted a lot of our processes that we already had in place to make it safe for our employees. But also made timelines a little bit longer because of that. And then also just navigating the different laws that was coming out. The ways, if someone was out because they were, a close contact, or, or they were positive, now we have to do what we need to do legally, notify our employees, notify, Department of Health, and go through those processes. So it definitely just add additional work to our day-to-day. And then also just managing our employees, how they felt about it, because everyone was on different spectrums, of how they felt about the pandemic, and trying to make sure we were meeting in the middle to, kind of please the masses.
Yeah, on that note, some of the consulting work that I was doing last year was around helping employers figure out how to navigate if employees don't want to be vaccinated, and how to handle such sensitive medical information, which we always have had to do. We've always had to protect medical information and personal information, but that during a pandemic, none of us have ever worked in an HR role in a pandemic like this. So it is that extra layer really took it up as far as how private is that information, and feelings around that. But ultimately having to make sure we're following laws and as it's changing. So that can be, that's a lot to carry when you're the staff person that people project all of their personal stuff onto. That's just part of it. And actually that is in line with, for us with THC staffing, we do recruiting, HR consulting, we do some licensing work. So during shelter in place, I knew, okay, got to be open-minded to what kinds of assistance companies are going to need. So we shifted from not as much recruiting to more of an hourly consulting of just really customized, like how can we assist as a third party HR group and we have experience in the cannabis industry, because there's so much you just wouldn't think of until it's happening, and to have a point person for that, to bring some calm and maybe project manage some things. A lot of it feels like, you know, it's a roller coaster, which means there's like finite project work, there's some long-term work, it's all intertwined. And meanwhile, right, like there's this perception that there's just so much hiring, it's the fastest growing, most booming industry, but what does that actually look like? And that's always shifting throughout the year, even without the pandemic. And okay, they made it essential, but it was already, right, like it was already such a intense, fast-paced industry. So, and last thing that's coming to mind for now is this is a medicinal plant. This is a industry that is medicine for a lot of people. So I think that right now feels like this is the time for cannabis, and it's felt that way for 10 years at least, where it's like this is happening, and how to know, like, okay, short term, what jobs do I want to, what do I want to be doing? Long term, where do I see this going for myself? So yeah, we've still been able to build some community through all of this virtual world. So as Ashley mentioned, like it does feel like it's continuing to grow and move forward, even if there's some like starts and stops.
Yeah, and I imagine as well, though, that with the turnover rate in the industry, that must have just, you know, really made that the pandemic feel like you were stretched. So we should probably add on the qualifications: ability to problem solve, handle challenges, pivot quickly, work well under pressure.
Very adaptable. Yeah, yes, turnover for sure. And I think that's why I was seeing so many positions for recruiters, and why there are so many cannabis recruiting companies that popped up over the last few years. It's a pretty saturated sector. But it makes sense that there definitely is a demand for, and as we've been talking about, companies need a lot of help with all kinds of HR and culture related things. But at the end of the day, how many resources, including time and money, do they actually have to put towards that? So you have to be adaptable and customize, especially like as a consultant or any kind of self-employment, be open to having to constantly tailor your services to meet the demand.
Yes, absolutely. There's a lot of customization that comes when you're doing consultant work, or self-employed. And yeah, I mean, working in the industry, and really wherever you are, whichever sector you find yourself in, you're often wearing multiple hats, and you're often working under pressure and having to adapt very quickly. Thinking about some of our jobs available, how do we find those job postings? Where would I start my search if I was looking for a cannabis or ancillary position in HR?
I would say just how you would look for any other kind of job. I mean, you can go to Indeed, you can go to LinkedIn. I would say also follow companies that you really believe in on all their social media platforms. They are posting their positions there. And then just making connections, reaching out, going to LinkedIn and following certain, HR professionals, because they're going to be the ones posting positions, and also for their departments as well. And going to events, another really big thing. The cannabis industry loves their events. So even if it's not a career fair or anything like that, still go to their events, because you can make connections there, get cards, email them, start building those relationships. I think I want to say that a million times. It's kind of like one of the best way to get into a company is doing that.
I agree. Not everyone pays attention to business cards or incoming messages through social media, but recruiters do. And people who are hiring, in a position to hire, they do pay attention, even if it seems like maybe you're not getting any traction. When I physically hold a business card, or when I'm like chatting with somebody during a virtual event, like anytime I'm physically doing something, it is resonating. I'm getting it into my brain somewhere. Even if there's a high volume of people like networking at a job fair, if you continue to do it and with intention, it does get noticed. Of course, not always. For instance, like if a company has, like mine, I have a business page and a personal. If you're trying to network with me through social media, I would say try going through the business first. If your first attempt is in my personal Instagram messages, that I might drop the ball on that. But if you give us a chance through our like company pages, whether it's LinkedIn, Instagram, and as I mentioned, like even virtual events in the chat, or I've had a lot of people follow up and say, I saw you speak at something. That's going to get my attention. Just naturally, I'm going to pay more attention. If there's somebody who was at something where I was, maybe we didn't get a chance to connect there, but they follow up with me, versus like if I get kind of the spammy messages where like it's similar to when you submit the same resume for everything. Like if it's not customized at all, it might be more likely to be lost. And definitely to Nikita's point of like actually going to companies' websites, the actual websites and email lists. We talked about this in the pre-session. Good old-fashioned signing up for companies' email lists, because a lot of my clients, when they're hiring, one of the first things they do is put the word out to their email list. They might not even post it publicly yet, and anybody on their list has received that. And a listing might only be up for a week, so that's why it's important to really target and stay focused on your ideal employers, and the ones that you would really be more likely to want to work for, just as much as you can pay attention to when they're hiring. And last note on that is a lot of cannabis recruiters will have all the same jobs listed. The same job might be listed with 3 cannabis recruiters, but also on the company's page. So just keep that in mind. And in some cases, it gets posted with a different job title. But the more you're looking at it, I consider this like personal research. The more you're looking at that kind of stuff, the more you notice those things and start to figure out the patterns, what this job actually is. And then that's segue to another part of our slide here of like what to actually put in your resume and cover letter. It's going to be easier to do that the more you know about the company and the more you know about the cannabis economy as a whole. Like keeping an eye on jobs that are listed in general is going to give you like a whole set of keywords and ways to approach this.
Yes, and we will touch on that later in this presentation about the resume and those transferable skills. Bringing it back though to the job posting. So I know personally for myself, and when I go and I do research for these sessions, I sometimes get a little overwhelmed when if I were to type into my Google search HR cannabis jobs. Sometimes it doesn't always, filter out what I want, like what I actually want to see. And Danielle, like you were saying, sometimes it's like multiple postings and it's like, is this the same job? So I don't know if you have any tips or tricks for people who are like me and maybe easily confused. Would it be better if I look directly at the company I hope to want to work for? Or do you find maybe I'm just typing my searches in wrong, or do I really just need to take the time to wade through all of those different opportunities to really see what might resonate with me?
I think definitely reaching out to those companies and seeing what they have is definitely a great way to go about it. And then also using other recruiting vendors as well, because sometimes those companies are not posting those positions on their job boards or on their websites. They're doing high level searches for them. They're going to want headhunters to find those positions. especially when they're getting to the point where they have the capital to be like, okay, this is a department that we really need to expand and get a very seasoned HR professional in here. They're going to be using those for headhunters to find them.
More reason to narrow down the list of like how many companies are you looking at. So I would say start with 1 or 2 and really just stay focused in on 1 or 2 companies and go from there. And yeah, definitely start with reaching out directly to the company. And know that with recruiters, third-party recruiters like myself, it could take time. You might hear back right away from a recruiter and then never hear from them again. You might not hear from them for a couple of years, and then all of a sudden they contact you with the perfect job at the perfect time. I mean, there's so much timing, set and setting, and just like chance to it also. So to increase your chances of building relationships with people who are hiring, I think you have to also think about knowing yourself. To your point, Ashley, like knowing yourself. Okay, if you feel overwhelmed by it, what's overwhelming you by it? Are you overwhelmed by in-person events? Maybe not. If you're not overwhelmed at an in-person event, maybe that's how you're going to try to get those leads and get that information. Have conversations about it rather than try to figure it out in your own head at the computer. And if you have the luxury of kind of trying different methods to see like, where are your people? Who are the people that you can talk to who have some experience with this to help you start to translate? I think of so much of this as translating and just figuring out like, okay, this is making sense to me. I'm being drawn to this. And sometimes that's the company culture. Sometimes it's the specific job itself. So whatever's calling you. And sometimes I have to just take a break from it. Like if I really need to be finding work, I feel like I can't take a break, but even just half a day or a day and try a different method or just straight up break from it. And really, I do talk to a lot of people who say, candidates who often they'll say, oh, I feel like you're the first person I've ever really been able to talk to about this. And so I really know firsthand, like how helpful that can be, how important it is to be able to, even if it's like just with a family member or friend who doesn't know anything about cannabis, but to be able to practice talking about it, because that leads to feeling prepared for interviews as well. So yeah, that's what came to mind when I'm thinking, okay, what do I do when I'm overwhelmed, like with websites and social media and researching and resumes and stuff.
I like that. Take my time, know myself, and know, which avenues are better, right? That we don't have to only take one path to find these jobs, but there are multiple avenues, and find the one that I would resonate most with. Now, all right, let's pretend I've done my search and now I have a few different job postings that I'm looking at. What might I look for, even as like a red flag on a job posting, right? Not every job posting is going to be created equally. Some might be very well written, some might just be a copy and pasted template. Are there certain, is there certain information on the job posting that I should be looking for that will say, oh, okay, I think that, this is a worthy opportunity, or, oh no, this job posting may have some red flags. What is a good job posting? And I figure I should ask those who might be creating those said job postings.
Bad job postings. I feel like when you're looking at job, descriptions, you really need to look at, from the summary that they're posting to the job responsibilities. See if those align. Because if they're not aligning, then maybe, the person who's, trying to recruit for this position doesn't truly know what this position is going to be. You want to make sure that when you're reading a job description that if you're going to apply for this position, get an interview for the position, you know what you're getting yourself into. So that goes into when you get that interview, asking, further questions so you can truly know what this position is going to entail. And then also when I look at job descriptions, some of the red flags I think of would be, I'm very nitpicky. So when it just comes to like, I don't want things repetitive on there. I also like to see, the equal opportunity, but, kind of note at the bottom to be there, because that's kind of show the culture of the company. Is that something they're truly going to be working towards, what they're looking for, and also their recruiting style. Are they just going to have like one or two interviews and select the individual, or are they going to actually truly look at a candidate pool, of a diverse candidate pool, I should add, before they make their decision? So those are just kind of some things that just pop in my mind just right this second for that. I could probably think of a few others, but Danielle, can you have anything to add?
For sure. Equal opportunity employer statement and any kind of vision statement. I think our audience has a pretty good radar for like when it's just words and when it's actually based on what the company really cares about. And sometimes it's just completely lacking, and the lack of that will tell you a lot. If they don't even mention the equal opportunity employer. And yeah, the alignment of, if something's not adding up and not making sense, that's not you. That's not you like not understanding, unless it's something that you just really don't have any experience with. And if you can't wrap your mind around like, what is this job? It's not all you, trust me. There's like something that's not being communicated or something that's not lining up. And as Nikita mentioned, maybe they don't know exactly what they're looking for, because what they're looking for depends on the candidates. So some will be way more detailed and longer than others. Ultimately, at the point where you're applying, you need to know enough about it that you can tailor your application and can see yourself like actually wanting to do this or being able to talk about it in an interview. So for instance, do they mention pay rate? I mean, I recommend to all of my clients, ideally, that you do mention a salary range. That's a part of like having a fair process, is saying, here's the minimum and maximum we're going to pay for this role, so that you know what to negotiate for and you know what you're getting into as far as how much is it paying. Are you an employee or contractor? There's some things that are left out in cannabis job postings that would never be left out in other industries. They would be explicit that you are a contractor or an employee, but in some cases there's a question mark. There's like banking problems and uncertainty. And so you want to look at what stage is the company at, and do they address that in there? Do they say, you'll be the first person on the marketing team, or you'll be our first sales representative in that state? There's some, what I think of as like the logistics of, would you have to relocate for this? So thinking through all of that and how much of that is actually addressed in the job description. And I think that when you see a good one that resonates with you, right? You're like, oh, wow, this feels like a breath of fresh air. Like they've really put thought into this listing versus one that's like kind of vague or confusing. And back to our point from before of like, is it coming directly from the company, or has it been like translated through a recruiter of some kind? You'll start to have a radar for that.
That advice can be used for whether you're looking for a role in HR or really in any other sector in the industry. And talking about job postings and where to find these job postings, Woke and CannaCareers as a whole, we've been working on our job board. Our job board is going to be a little unique, as where, we are trying to ensure that any company posted is what we'd consider a vetted company. And so I'm just going to pull up here, get into CannaCareers, what we look for in a company, what we're personally looking for when we're trying to vet out different companies to ensure that they're safe spaces. We don't only want to make sure that the job posting looks good and it resonates with us, but maybe there are some things that we can look for in a company that will say, okay, this is most likely going to be a safe place for marginalized individuals. Danielle, do you want to share going through this job board employer checklist?
Sure. Yeah, we wanted to just take the opportunity today to show some of our process with CannaCareers. This is something we came up with as a group about a year ago. It's a work in progress, and we know that cannabis companies are a work in progress. So this is a checklist that we use. We're not putting ourselves out there as gatekeepers and like we're holding the highest standard, but we have to work towards some standards and to have a vetted job board. How are we deciding, you know, is this a situation that feels like more likely to be trying to be a safe space versus like just straight up toxic. So there's a whole spectrum, right? And we thought that, you know, this is our checklist for employers for our job board. It's also the kind of thing that we recommend that you think about as you're deciding where do you want to work and which things do you want to apply for. So I'll just go through a few. Number one, is it a legal company? Is it a legal job? I have no problem with, you know, underground pop-up events and companies and off the radar, but you want to know where's your paycheck coming from and how predictable is that going to be, and what kind of risk are you taking on, whether it's legal risk or maybe like risk of some kind of environment that you were trying to get away from. So let's see. Is there an HR person? Is there a whole HR team, or is there some kind of ad hoc, like for instance, with dispensaries, often the dispensary manager is the on-site HR person that you would go to, even if it's a huge company. They might, your designated HR person might be your dispensary manager. So you just want to try to get a sense of like, what's the structure of the team and who would you be reporting to? Because that looks so many different ways. Here's a question: is your community engagement plan clearly defined, and is it providing or planning to provide a tangible benefit to marginalized communities? I mean, this is a lifetime of work ahead of us. We don't expect companies to have it all figured out and to be doing everything, but it's something we want to be working towards, and we want to see evidence that companies are trying to figure this out, doing something about it other than just like having a big PR and marketing budget. What are you actually doing? And a lot of times you can see that specifically in the hiring process. So some of this is about the hiring process, like what are you paying? What's the pay rate? As I mentioned, what's the salary range? What benefits are offered? Is that publicly advertised, or are they kind of picking and choosing who gets benefits? Obviously, it would be more fair if it's in the job description. And a lot of this is publicly available, like for instance, in a state like Massachusetts, where a company has to have a social impact plan or diversity plan, you can often find their full policy online, so that you don't have to like awkwardly ask for it or like seem argumentative or something. You can find some of this in your research. And then employee handbook, I'll just pause there, that like there's so much of the company culture and what the environment's going to be like that's really laid out in an employee handbook or lack of employee handbook. And again, that's maybe not something you'd be like confronting them about too soon in the process, but like at some point, if you're going to work for a company, you would want to know that they have some sort of thorough and thoughtful set of policies in writing, so that you'll know like, what do you do when something goes wrong? No place is a perfectly safe space. There's going to always be somebody who is harassed in some way or has a complaint of some kind. And what is the process for that? That to me, that shows a lot about a company. Have they thought that through? How do they talk about that? So it's a lot, you know. As I mentioned, we don't expect all companies on our job board to be able to check all these boxes. Oh, and I guess in conclusion, there would be if there's some, oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah, if there is something on the job board, that's something we recommend applying for.
Yeah, my mouse went rogue on me for a minute. I was like, I never found my mouse. Oh, yes. Yes, please apply to, any employers out there, please apply to our job board. But moving forward to the other topics on the slide, because I want to know, how do I know if I have relevant transferable skills? And we can talk about, HR transferable skills, but also, in the industry in general, because I just want to pick both of your brains as HR professionals. I want to know, how do I identify transferable skills? And then how do I use those on my resume?
Yeah, so two-part question. So I'll kind of talk a little more of the HR transferable skills, but I've actually, I have firsthand experience, putting that on my resume and, trying when getting my job. And that is really the soft skills. Also being an educator for, a decent amount of my, adult career. Those came with a lot of transferable skills. The documentation I had to do. HR, I think, uses the word documentation on a regular. We are constantly documenting, and being able to have that experience from being an educator, that was very transferable to my position now. And then also just having the awareness when it comes to training. Being a teacher, you are a trainer. So being able to articulate policies and procedures and also other kind of trainings within the cannabis space is very transferable. So those are some of the things from my past that I was able to bring into my career here at MCR. And as for other positions, there are so many positions within the cannabis space. Working for a lab, we have a full data team. You do not need to be a data analysis in the cannabis space to go into the cannabis space. We have lab techs, we have a QA department. So a lot of those careers that are in other lab spaces, like pharma or biotech, are transferable into the cannabis space. And that is from my experience working in a lab, is that we have those. And then also for the other positions that are more front end, like our client service team, if you are, have client service experience in other companies, it's transferable to our company as well. So there's a lot of opportunity. I think people should need to research and see what positions are out there, and then looking at those job descriptions, because a lot of the stuff that's written in those job descriptions are probably something similar to what there are in other job descriptions out there at those other companies, other industries.
That reminded me, I used to, as recently as a few years ago, I would print a job description out. If it was something I could see myself really wanting to do, I would print it out and literally use a highlighter to highlight the parts of the description that were my strong skills. And then I think of it in two ways: that there's your specific job history, that's a timeline, right? But there's the summary. There's a creative aspect to this, where at the top, you could put your summary of qualifications, or you could put it towards the bottom. There's different ways you can present it, but it might seem redundant, but it's not, because, there's your specific work experience where they're going to look at that. Of course, they're going to be like, where'd you work and when and all that. But for instance, especially women and women's work, like HR, I think of as kind of gendered or very gendered. And so you might not have had a job title that said management in it, or a title that said payroll and benefits administrator, but you could put that in your summary: 10 years of management, or 5 years payroll administration for a team of 10, right? You're not saying you were the HR manager. You're not lying about a title that you didn't have. You're describing the very specific and most relevant experience. So for me, at this point in my career, one of the things I sometimes put in the summary is crisis management. I don't really want to always be doing crisis management, and the company might not think of it as crisis management, but I might say that if that's relevant to that context. Now, that's an example of if there's something in the job description that mentions project management or change management. Okay, what does that mean? Have I done that? And how do I want to describe that? Because so much of our experience, we have done this. We're totally qualified, and we say it in every session, and I've seen it for years. Men in general apply for things that they're not qualified for way more often than women do. And they come in negotiating, trying to like upsell the pay rate right out the gate. Like a lot of times they'll come right into the interview, and I'm mostly speaking about white men. So I'm not saying like, let's be like white men, but like, let's apply for things if we know we can do that, or if we can do enough of it where we're like, hey, I can do half of this, no question. And then this other half, I could learn so quickly. If I'm given some support and training and an employee handbook, I could totally do this, you know? And so I think the summary doesn't need to be long. It doesn't need to be a lot of full sentences, because this is your resume we're talking about. Now in the cover letter is where you could do a narrative and describe some of it and use full sentences. But I get overwhelmed by having to do a resume, even though I look at hundreds of them. So like my approach is more minimalist. But you know, sometimes it makes sense to have a much more detailed and longer resume. I think it's also like, again, tailored for the job description.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that, because I mean, I've also looked at a lot of resumes throughout my career. And sometimes when they are extremely detailed, it can get overwhelming when you're looking at it, and you're kind of questioning, like, it can be confusing at times. So sometimes keeping it, you know, simple, to the facts, like you say here, objective, you know, listing everything you want to list, but then making that cover letter, that storyteller, kind of going into those, you know, a situation that you overcame when, like, you know, trying to describe, you know, a relevant experience and those transferable skills. You might not be, you know, an HR professional previously, but you might have been a manager and you had to do conflict resolution. So that, you know, describing a situation like that in your cover letter to let them know, it's like, I can handle those, you know, these kind of situations as your HR professional, goes a long way.
So it sounds like I've heard you say a keyword a few times, conflict resolution. It's 2 words, but a key concept.
Yeah, I think definitely conflict resolution is a huge keyword, because there's always going to be something going on. Not everyone's going to play nice in the sandbox. There's always going to be, we are a growing industry in any company as well, any industry. There's always going to be, you know, individuals that might not get along, have different type of working styles. So there's those types of things to be able to mitigate those issues in a company is extremely important. Especially with a, you know, young industry. You want to make sure that we're rolling up our sleeves, getting the work done, and when we have issues that occur, you want to be able to kind of nip it in the bud as quickly as possible so you can get back to what you're doing. So definitely conflict resolution would definitely be a key word. Training, any type of training you've done, another key word. Sorry if you can hear my dogs over here, I'm not sure.
And something that I see a lot is full cycle recruiting.
Yes, full cycle recruiting. So that's from everything from posting the position to actually getting the person through the door. And that doesn't even stop there, because there's also the retention. You want to make sure it is expensive to recruit and also retain, and to have to go, you know, do it all over again is a process. And for the cannabis space and other industries, you have the background checks. For Massachusetts, we also have the Cannabis Control Commission license that we have to have for every individual that works for our industry. So not only does the company need to be licensed, but our employees also need to be licensed as well. So it's costly. So we want to make sure that our retention is very high.
Do you have a memorable resume, right? That, you know, when you're looking through so many different resumes, you know, was there a resume that, you know, you still think of that was like, oh, if all resumes, you know, looked like this? And if you do have one, you know, can you share, was it, you know, was it formatted? Was it the format, the font? You know, was it minimalist? Did it have a lot of detail? You know, and what are you you did share like, some of the things that you're looking for in a resume, but when you are reviewing resumes, like what exactly are you looking for, besides, being objective and having those keywords, but does the format actually matter?
Kind of yes and no. I mean, there's so many different formats out there. And sometimes it can be, if it's font, definitely important, because sometimes I feel like people try to get so much information onto one page. Because I think, at least for when I was looking for careers, when I first was going into like the workforce, people were like, it needs to be one page. Get everything on one page. And that's not necessarily the case. You can have a 2-page resume. It's fine. So sometimes I feel like when you get a resume, it is so compact, small print, a lot of information where it can get very confusing at times. So minimalist, I think, is kind of how I like to look at resumes. I like to see the facts, and I like to see a cover letter. I love seeing a cover letter because I feel like I can actually get to know the person a little bit before I reach out for a interview. And having the facts. A pop of color never hurts either. Sometimes it's nice to see a little color off to the side, and maybe even a headshot on there so you can see who you're looking for. I also know some people don't like putting their photo on resumes, which is totally fine. I think one of the things that deters people from that is because they don't want to see what the individual looks like. So there's no potential discrimination that happens. I think the cannabis space is a safe space. We are so driven on, being inclusive, having diversity plans, that is not something that a person should deter, from putting something like that on there. So those are a few things that come to mind when I'm thinking about resumes and what kind of draws me to looking at them and, reaching out to those candidates. One really plus I do like seeing when it comes to someone's experience is seeing someone progress in a company. I love when I see a resume and it actually shows someone getting promoted within a company and, really growing in that company. One thing that kind of deters me a little bit is seeing a lot of job hopping. Those are kind of like a red flag for me. I'm just like, why haven't you stayed in this company? Is it the company itself? Is it you as a, is it a culture fit that you haven't found for yourself? Those kind of things.
I'm glad you brought that up because that's something that I think is becoming more common for good reason. That people do shorter stints. I think I have no idea how, I don't know what the reason is. How am I supposed to know? I don't know the candidate. And so that might be something that if you have moved around a lot, and maybe there are times when it's like for a very obvious reason, the way I think about it is like, can you group any of it together? That like maybe it looks like you jumped around, but maybe it was all the same kind of work and you were self-employed during those 2 years or something. So you want to group it and present it differently. Or if you're getting into like, how do I fit all this in one page? Well, it doesn't have to be continuous. I know that traditionally it had to be continuous, but if you've got too much and you're trying to figure out what to cut out, and maybe you can cut out some things, even if it means there's gaps. It's a risk. You don't know how it's going to be received. I just gave you that piece of advice, but another recruiter would say, oh, it's got to be continuous, and explain why or whatever. The cover letter is a place to explain. For instance, I'm really trying to do whatever I can long term, like for people who have been incarcerated to be working in this industry. That the cover letter might be a place you want to explain that. You might want to save that to the interview. But at the end of the day, like if you're formerly incarcerated person who's trying to figure out how to explain your job history, you're doing it in a context of like you're trying to work for a company that's welcoming of that. And so I guess that's an example of like thinking of the specific context and who's receiving the resume. How much do they already know about you? If it's somebody who already knows about you, that's going to be different, perhaps. You know, you might want to tweak it a little bit. But really, back to the basics, I mean, font, it has to be legible. I know it gets confusing and overwhelming because there's so much AI and so many different technologies that are used to process resumes. So I have heard some advice that like you've got to have a ton of keywords and a ton of information in there because it's not a human. Well, guess what? A lot of humans are still looking at resumes. And again, if it's, I think what you want is to be trying to work for companies where there's more likely to be a human handling your resume. So they have to be able to read it. And color is great, but not too much. So it's kind of like in moderation, and just make sure you send it as a PDF so that the person who's receiving it is seeing exactly what you want them to see, and that they're not opening a Word doc on their phone and it looks terrible. So there's some basics that I think are the same in every field. And with cannabis, very important to like keep it focused on the exact thing you're applying for, because there's so much you could say. Also, I'll just pause here of like, you don't need to take up a lot of room in your cover letter talking about like medical cannabis and how it helps somebody in your family or your personal medical history. Like that's real and relevant, but is the kind of thing where you would want to like be intentional about how you're sharing personal information in your application and then throughout the process.
And I just want to add something. I'm happy that you add the resume being a PDF, because I've heard so many people uploading their resumes to like Indeed. And when I get on the other end, I have to email them for their resume because it is so distorted that I cannot comprehend what is happening on there. So thank you for pointing that out. It is definitely, make sure your resume is going so the person on the other side can actually read it. And they don't have to, because we're getting hundreds of resumes, and sometimes if it's not eligible for us, then we're not going to reach out for that resume. So great point on that.
I've talked to candidates sometimes where like I was corresponding through email with them, but then when I was trying to talk to them, their voicemail box was full on their phone number. So like some of the most basic things could be the reason you're not hearing back from people. So I think especially for anybody who feels overwhelmed, sometimes that's why I said you have to just like take a half a day break from it, because it might be something that when you come back to it, you're like, oh my gosh, there's a typo in my phone number. No wonder why nobody's calling me, you know? But a session like this, we're kind of overthinking it, right? That's the point, is to like get into all the details, but there's also like some things like that, also having somebody look at it. They don't have to be an HR person to give you good advice on your resume, because it could be something like that, where they're like, you see them squinting at it and they're like, what's this email address? You know? So always get input if you can.
Yes, and the input is important, because if you're like me, your eyes will never see your own typos. And sometimes I find like even, you know, Word doesn't always pick up all your typos, or if it's, you know, grammatically incorrect, right? So does it read well? So having someone else's eyeballs before you actually send it might be helpful. And I wanted to ask, you know, about the resume, do you like it to be tailored, you know, in some way to the job that the person is applying for? I remember when I was learning how to write resumes, you know, they always put, you know, your goal or your job objective, make it match what you're actually applying for, so that you're using the same language that's on that actual job description or job posting. Do you like to see that, that it's actually tailored to the job that the candidate is applying for?
I definitely like seeing it tailored. That phrase, you know, dress for the position you want, kind of goes for that resume as well. You want that resume to be dressed for that position. Because again, like I stated, we're looking at so many different resumes, and if you tailor it, get those keywords in there, our eyes are going to be drawn to that resume a little bit more. So definitely catch our eyes because there's hundreds of them that we're looking at.
And keywords might also help if the company is using any AI or software to scan resumes too. So Yes, put those keywords on
Oh,
there.
one
Now,
way
when
you,
you're, oh,
oh,
sorry.
sorry. Oh, really briefly, one way you can tailor it is if it's a job that the company does have a vision statement and you know that that is like a real part of their culture, you can mention that somewhere, like with a little tagline or something about like that you have high ethical standards, or you have some sort of like soundbite about a vision statement. It's a little risky, but again, if it's relevant to the job you're applying for instance, one of the resumes I got the most response to was, I think I was around 30, and I just took a chance of, because I had some jobs already and I was like, let me see what else is out there. I had a little tagline that said fearless yet practical. And I got 3 interviews, and in all 3 interviews, they were just phone interviews. I didn't actually get a job from that, but I got really close to getting a job from that. All 3 companies mentioned it. They all said, oh, we just wanted to hear more about what you mean by that. Fearless yet practical. It really got our attention. And can you tell us more? So I knew it was a risk. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who saw it and thought it was weird and moved on. But like, just wanted to share that example.
The cannabis industry can certainly use more individuals who are fearless yet practical. One of the themes that I kept hearing as you're talking about resumes, you're talking about cover letters as well. And it seems like they really do like go hand in hand. What is a cover letter and how do you make a good cover letter?
A cover letter is basically everything you would want to say in your resume, but you probably shouldn't put in your resume because it's going to make it very long. You want to, tell a story with a cover letter. Really want to express to the company, those transferable skills in there, and situations that are going to be important for them that you are going to be able to bring to their company to help. Like I said earlier, like the conflict resolution, given a situation where you can, express to them, like, I had this scenario, I was able to do X, Y, and Z to, resolve the situation, and explaining there. It's also a great place to explain any type of gaps in your work experience, any type of job jumping. Like I stated earlier, that was kind of a red flag for me. Explaining why that is the case for you. Was it not job jumping, and it was more you were a contractor that was helping with the same thing for multiple different companies, and you weren't able to articulate it in a way you would want to in your resume. So those are kind of the things that I think would be best in a cover letter. Daniel, I really liked your point about, telling the story about what cannabis kind of means to you. We get so many of those stories in there, and that's not necessarily needed in a cover letter. We understand that everyone has a reason why they love the plant. There is a reason why. It's why a lot of people come into the industry, and we really want to see that those transferable skills and what you can bring to the company a little bit more than why you love the plant itself.
Although in this context, I think a way that you could mention it might be like a one-liner that's kind of leading into a paragraph, like somewhere partway down. For instance, cannabis brings all kinds of people together. And maybe you want to highlight that one of the things you love most about cannabis and how it's most relevant to this HR position you're applying for is that you want to be part of a diverse team, and you thrive on working with a diverse team, and you want to be part of that and make things better as a whole, right? So there's a way to like give a little glimpse of your passion for cannabis in a specific way. And that'll definitely separate you from people who are like, completely focused on how much money can I make in cannabis or something like that. So we're not saying like leave it out completely, but just be really thoughtful about how much space you take up, because a cover letter should not be more than a page. I agree that a resume can be longer. Like resume, I think 1 page per decade of experience, but that's really a rough guideline. With a cover letter, if it's more than a page, I'm probably not going to read all of it unless I've specifically asked for something really detailed. If it's a highly specialized position, you might find yourself going longer on these things. I've seen people, I'm seeing it more like in a cover letter, they might have a list in kind of like list format for like, because our culture is so like short attention span. That's okay. I mean, that's actually really helped me when I have a lot of candidates for something. If the cover letter is like organized in a bit of a list format or with a few headings, that's not traditional, but it might make sense depending on the position. And make sure you read the instructions to apply. They might say a cover letter is required, and you need to make sure you figure out how to submit a cover letter. It might say what you need to cover in your cover letter. Some employers are getting tricky like that, where they'll give you a test in the job description where it's like, make sure to include these 3 things in your cover letter. So I would say just start with an outline of everything you know you need to get in there, and then play with like, okay, what's most important towards the top, and maybe have some personal notes in there, but don't get too personal at this phase. You still have the interview process, and you could do some follow-up networking to try to get things in there that you weren't sure if you should include that in your cover letter.
I think also with the way that everything is, not only in the cannabis industry, but this pandemic has allowed the opportunity for individuals to really reevaluate, is this career that I'm currently in the career choice that's best for me? And so people have had a lot of opportunity to sort of reinvent their careers and the trajectory of their career. And so people can really kind of highlight that in their cover letter. I'm transitioning from one career and I want to transition into this field because XYZ. And hey, here are all the skills that I've learned in other industries that I can bring to the table. I happen to love cover letters because they really do get to show the personality of the individual who is applying for the position. And in a way too, maybe as a recruiter and as an HR manager, you can read that personality in the cover letter and kind of get an idea, would this individual be a good fit for the culture of, this particular establishment or for this job.
I'd also like to just add one more thing to that. A cover letter is also kind of like a sample of your writing as well. And as being the HR manager, I am constantly having to write to our employees. So when you are going into the HR profession, someone who's reading that's probably gonna look at how do you articulate things to an individual. So it's a nice little also a flow test of your writing skills.
And same as the resume, it should match the resume as far as any formatting. Make sure it's a PDF. Sometimes the resume will look really polished and the cover letter is kind of a mess. So anything you can do to use formatting, and even the file name. Jelani and I were talking about this. He's one of the recruiters with THC Staffing, and the importance of how you name the file that you upload. It might seem so not important, but there's a human downloading that and maybe submitting it somewhere else, and look at your file name. We get some pretty long, confusing file names, and it might not matter, but it might actually be something that somebody notices. And it's a reminder to just take a step back, make sure it's all consistent and going to be received with your best foot forward. Like, you want them to receive what you're seeing on your end.
Ashley Boucher resume, Ashley Boucher cover letter. And that way, if you think you lost the file as a recruiter or HR manager, you can just Ashley Boucher in the search bar and it will pop right up. So, those are the formats I typically would use, is just my name and then what the document is. Does that work for you? Do you like that format? Yeah. All right. So I've done the job search, wrote my resume, wrote my cover letter. You like me, you want to interview me. What do I show up? How do I show up for an interview? And in all honesty, I actually, personally, I had a real life interview this past week. It was for a position I had applied for quite some time ago. And it won't take me away from what I currently do. It'll just allow me to expand what I currently do. And I'll be honest, I was super nervous. I was like, what do I expect? It's a Zoom interview with multiple people. I'm like, how early do I show up? What do I wear? Is my lighting okay? And the sun the sun is hiding here today, so I am dark. Right now, my background's pretty dark. It was very, those feelings beforehand in the preparation, because we are in a different landscape. We're not going to a place, we're not meeting individuals. I always think there's something magical that happens when you get to sit down with somebody and you're there physically. It's a lot easier to communicate. But yeah, it was definitely a different experience overall. Overall, it did go very well. I wasn't sure what they were going to ask, but I did have a few questions prepared myself. And it is, though, overall, it's a very anxiety provoking experience. Are there tips and tricks or advice that you would give to potential candidates that are interviewing when they show up?
Some tips. So definitely dress for the position you want. I've definitely have seen multiple different type of outfits come through the door for interviews. You want to look professional when you're going into the space. Yes, we are cannabis, and we are a very low-key type of industry when it comes to attire, but you still should be coming to these interviews professional. Showing up a little earlier, because it's never great when someone is coming to the lobby and trying to find their candidates to interview. So always show up a little bit earlier. I would say at least like 10 or so minutes earlier, just so you're there and you can take a minute, go to the bathroom, you can, drink some water, you can relax, because it is nervous. You're going to be nervous. It happens. Your hands can get clammy. It's never fun to feel like you have to be on that side of the table and be interviewed and ask questions that you don't know, answer questions you don't know what you're going to get. So those are definitely two major things, because also when you're dressing for the job you want, you feel a little more confident in yourself. Since we're remote, it is you can't really show up early, but definitely be at your computer a few minutes beforehand, get ready to log on, and be prepared and bring those questions, because that's going to go into the negotiating, because you really want to know the full story of the position. I'll tell everyone, do your own research of that position, see what's out there, what is competitive, because it's never good to go into a position and not know what you're going to get. You need to know kind of beforehand. Yes, you could see a salary range, but if you think that you are bringing more to the table for the company, negotiate.
I can mention on that note, it's also okay to not get rushed into negotiating anything specific. And in that case, my advice is always, when you go into any kind of meeting, like especially a job interview, know your boundary of what you're not going to talk about. And my way of being ready for that is to literally script a talking point. So it's a polite, direct, non-threatening, I'm not prepared to talk about that in this interview. I'm very open to following up. For instance, with negotiating, I think is a clear one that a lot of times it seems like it would be a good thing to go into an interview and then all of a sudden be negotiating. But if you are going to do that, you have to be ready to do that and not just take what's offered, right? So it's kind of you have to be prepared for, if you are going to negotiate, what are you going to say? What are you going to negotiate for? And if you're not prepared, or if they ask you something that you don't feel comfortable answering, if they ask you a very personal question or something that feels too soon to be navigating, it's a similar talking point. It's basically anything that comes up that you feel either flustered by, that you're not sure what to say, or you don't want to get into, it's okay to have a boundary, because if it's a good employer for you, hopefully they will respect that and kind of be able to get through that. It shouldn't be a deal breaker. I have worked with some employers who it's like they get really offended when somebody tries to negotiate and it's like a deal breaker for the employer. I try to avoid doing recruiting for employers that are gonna filter people out who try to negotiate. So by the time you're in an interview, especially if you're getting into anything really personal, for instance, about like disability accommodations, hopefully there's been enough of a process where you feel like you're ready to talk about that and know your rights of what you can ask for and what they shouldn't be asking or what they shouldn't be putting you on the spot about.
Yeah, Daniel, I'm happy you brought that up because with being such a young industry, we have a lot of people who are interviewing for, for their companies that haven't had proper interview training. So they don't know the do's and don'ts when it comes to interviewing. So being comfortable to be like, I do not feel, comfortable answering this question at this time is definitely in your rights to say, because they shouldn't be asking you anything really personal during those interviews, because at the end of the day, those kind of things they might not think about, but could be used as, things that could potentially discriminate, them against your position there. And, I would hope that, companies aren't doing that, but with such a young industry, again, they don't know their do's and don'ts when it comes to proper interviewing.
Or they do and they don't care. And they're going into it with bias that they already know they want to hire their cousin. And so everybody else is just like due diligence and like has to somehow be better than their cousin that they've already decided they think is the best. I'm using the word cousin liberally because it's not always somebody blood related. It could be like somebody they already know who they have as the standard. And so it can be awkward. It can be really awkward to try to negotiate anything or ask any questions. But I wanted to mention one way I think of negotiating is also like, it's not just about dollar amounts and benefits or your job title. It could be something way less threatening and something so related to the job description. Back to Nikita's point of like knowing the job description in and out, knowing about the company, because then you're not like, hey, I'm going to need to get paid more money because of this. You're just like, hey, here's one of my strongest skills that I'm most excited to bring to the table. And you're laying the groundwork for they get to know you and your values so that by the time you're following up and talking about salary, it's like you've already planted that seed of your value.
Absolutely, because a lot of times our companies out there, they don't know what a true HR professional would bring to the table because they're not HR professionals themselves. So they don't know what to put in those job descriptions. So going into those interviews and asking them further questions so they actually can understand like what else you can bring is going to help a lot down the line once you get an offer and you want to go through the negotiating process.
And you both alluded to this, when you're talking about the questions that you should be asking, making sure the questions during the interview process aren't discriminatory. And, during the whole presentation, we did talk about that part of HR's role is actually to help individuals navigate hostile work environments. Are there any tips that you have, and I'm not sure that you've had to do this in your particular role, navigating some of the hostile work environments, currently. Danielle, I guess you alluded to, working with crisis. How do you navigate a hostile work environment, both from an HR perspective and maybe from an employee perspective?
So I think the first step is also like letting our employees know that we're there for them. So during the onboarding process, definitely letting them know, going over the handbook, going over the harassment prevention policy that we have, going over any type of professionalism policies that we have, code of conduct, workplace violence prevention policies, making sure that they know that those are in place to protect them and kind of showing them where in the handbook of the process of doing it. As the HR person, knowing when to escalate it and when to do investigations. We really want to empower our employees to speak up and let us know if they are feeling uncomfortable in any type of way. and letting them know what is harassment, because it's not just physical harassment, it's also mental harassment. If it is unwanted, it is harassment. And making sure that individuals know that. Sometimes I think people aren't thinking that something verbal can come off as harassment, and it can. So just making sure everyone is educated. I think it's important to have those trainings on an annual basis, especially in an expanding company. You want to make sure people understand what their right is and what they should not be doing, especially when we're such a close-knit company. And also just in the cannabis space, we're a very free, industry. We are, smoking, we are, hanging out outside of work, and it is a very friendly and welcoming space. But sometimes that line needs to be know where that line is and that you don't cross it, because we are still a professional industry. So just knowing your rights, understanding where to go to, who your point of contact is, who to escalate it to, and then for HR, knowing this process, because there's always going to be two sides of it. You're going to have to do your investigation. You're going to have to talk to the person who's, with the complaint, and also the person who is the reason for the complaint. Potentially, there might have to be footage that has to be watched. Potentially, there's going to have to be interviews with potential other employees that might have saw the instance, the incident that happened. So it's a process, and then also making sure that everyone is protected as well, and the company and the employee.
Yeah, I knew MCR would probably have a thorough process compared to a lot of companies, because that's always my first question as an employee, or if I'm going to be working with an employer. What does that look like? What's the emergency plan, basically? Maybe it comes from working for a doctor's office for so many years of like, okay, when you have a medical emergency, you call 911. But what about when you're at work and there's an incident and you feel triggered or harassed or whatever happens? What do you do? What's in the company policy about what you do, and what are you going to do personally? So for instance, it's great to hear like harassment prevention and education training, but when something actually happens, what's the complaint process? That's not necessarily the first question you want to ask an employer, like, how do I make a complaint? But just at some point in your onboarding, you want to know who's your point person, and what if you have a problem with the point person? What if the HR manager is the one who harasses you, right? So there's a lot to think through for yourself of like, what am I going to do if that happens? And to me, in like legalese and an employee handbook, it's an anti-retaliation policy. Not only how do I make a complaint, but what does my employer do to make sure I know that I'm not going to be retaliated against for making a complaint? Now, that's kind of like advanced level HR that I would love to see all cannabis companies doing. They're still trying to figure out the complaint process. And when you're talking about what's the anti-retaliation procedure or policy, they're like, what? But that's often what happens when, for instance, when you're trying to unionize, you get fired, right? So what's the policy to prevent you from getting fired if you're unionizing? So I think of it kind of like that. There's a lot I could say about this, but I'll be really brief to like about lawyering up. There's two levels of that. There's like when you are consulting with a lawyer so that you know your rights and how to move. And then there's if you have to escalate and let somebody know that you're talking to a lawyer. Like they don't need to know that you're talking to an employment lawyer just to know your rights, right? Like, but maybe they do need to know at some point. Maybe it does need to be escalated and a lawyer actually needs to be formally involved. So I just wanted to point that out, that like employment lawyers can be really, really helpful. Sometimes the initial call is free, or there could be a really concise email about like, here's what I'm facing. Can I talk to an employment lawyer? There's a lot to be learned from researching online and also talking with lawyers. I'm not saying like I recommend being your own lawyer, but like there's a whole bunch of information out there that, is not just, it's not taught to us. It's not common sense. It's the kind of thing we have to really always be open to, like that there's probably a lot that my employer isn't telling me that I have the right to. But then how to navigate that, it takes help. It doesn't always have to be a lawyer that helps you with that, but somebody familiar with the process, or who has had experience navigating it themselves.
All very great points, Danielle. Thank you for adding that part, because it's not what we want to see as an employer, that our employee would have to go to that length. But if it does come to that, we want to make sure that they get the proper guidance that they need to handle it.
And I think when working with people, you never know. Everyone is very different. Everyone has, comes from different backgrounds, have different personalities, and it can always get challenging when you bring us all together, especially in a highly stigmatized industry that we're trying to diversify, right off the bat. Some of us have great cultural competency skills, and others, maybe not so much. But one thing that's very much appreciated is a company that does support the employees and that does provide resources and support in the event that, something does happen. It's not really the question of if, but usually when something might happen. Hopefully it doesn't, have to escalate to needing a lawyer or official, legal resources, but those resources are available in the event that that does happen. And would you believe that we are at 4:01, right? We are at the end of our session. I don't know if there are any questions. If you do have any questions, feel free to pop them into the chat. We'll hopefully address any questions that you may have, but I would love to invite Sammy or Lo back to close out another wonderful CannaCareers session. So thank you so much, Nikita and Danielle, and welcome back, Sammy.
You're muted.
Sammy, you're on mute.
Thanks, guys. I needed that. I wanted to once again say thank you to our three speakers, to Danielle, Ashley, and Nikita. Thank you so much for joining us today, for spending 2 hours of valuable Saturday time sharing your wisdom and your experience and your expertise. This was a very, very informative session, and we do actually have some questions from the audience if you're willing to stay just a little bit longer. From Venus, she has 2 questions. Any advice for current HR professionals in the cannabis industry, either startup or legacy? Any advice for people already sitting in the HR seat in the cannabis industry?
2 advice. Let's think. Definitely do not be deterred from challenges. The cannabis space is constantly changing, and it can be overwhelming. And I think if you're looking for a position in the HR space in the cannabis, is being able to handle those challenges pretty much on an everyday basis. It's going to be constant, especially with the Cannabis Control Commission regulations when it comes to the HR practices, as well as just like every day trying to help a company go from startup to, full-blown established company.
Yeah, kind of along those lines, like if you already have cannabis HR experience, you're going to always have that. You're going to always have that edge, and companies need that and will be looking for that. And I think especially with the political times, they really need that. You can really leverage your experience, and it's about, what do you want to do? Of all of the companies you could work for and the types of HR work you could do, being clear with yourself, what do you really want to do? Maybe you have to work towards that. It might take longer than you want, but having that end goal or that vision in mind, so that you stay focused on that trajectory. And it's not always linear. Sometimes it might feel like, oh, is this company a setback? Is this role taking too long to get me to the next thing? So pay attention to that. How does it feel? And but to Nikita's point, yeah, this is the long game. HR, and this is going to always be around, specifically for cannabis, for sure. And so don't be afraid to step away from it either. There's a lot of candidates we work with who take a break from cannabis and come back. I don't think that that is a setback, because it's mainstream now. So like, it's not one or the other. You can work in cannabis and outside, and it intersects in ways that you might not expect. So staying open to that.
Amazing. Thank you, guys. We do have an additional question, and it's a really, really good one. For somebody that has worked in a legacy cannabis kind of a capacity, or with a legacy cannabis company, how do you put that in your resume? How do you add that to your resume when you are looking to pursue work in the legalized cannabis sector?
Ooh, Nikita, I would love to know what you think about that, because it's so case by case.
It is very case by case, and I'm trying to think how would be the best way to articulate that in a resume, because sometimes a red flag for us could be something that we're just like, wait a second, what's going on here? I would say, I feel like that would be best described in a cover letter, is going through it. I'm not sure if it's best suited for a resume, but it's one of those storyteller kind of moments that you would have, and I think it's easier to explain it in a cover letter versus in a resume. That would be my advice for that.
And similarly, I would say you might be able to get it in your resume in the summary section, where
That too.
you don't want it to be too confusing or like off from your actual work experience you list. But if you have one point in there about like some cannabis experience, I think we all can take a cue that like, oh, there's some cannabis experience somewhere in this history. I want to know more. And maybe I'm not seeing it in there anywhere else, but if it's in your cover letter, and that's an example of something you might be able to get a feel for before you submit your written application, of like that particular company or the person who's going to be receiving your resume. Is that something they value, or are they going to see it as a red flag? Because that's what I mean, case by case. I've heard people say like, oh, I don't want anybody from the legacy market. I don't want any illegal grow experience because that's not relevant. And like, well, yeah, it is relevant. Of course it's relevant. But if they've got that bias in their mind, you want to know that and just kind of ease it in there somewhere, instead of like, if it's a situation where you know they're going to value it, then you can be explicit. Right. And that's a benefit of working with a recruiter, that you can let them know that that's what's going on and kind of try to tailor it as you're applying for specific things.
Thank you so much for that, ladies. And thank you to our audience for providing those great questions. I want to point out once more that CannaCareers does have what we call office hours, which are one-on-one resume reviewing sessions. So if you do have a resume that you'd like somebody that is a cannabis industry and HR professional to look at, check out our website. You'll be able to find us at wocc.world/CannaCareers.